Hey folks, Brian Martin, the boss man, coming back at you with our top tech, Michael Forrest. We're back to work on the ranch hand. We've just picked it up recently from Thunder Graphics on the stripe job. We couldn't be more happy with the way that come out. But we're ready to move on to the next project. And it looks like, Michael, I think you'll share my opinion, the factory really screwed us up on the DEF tank and the little fuel tank in front of it. So what do we got for a fix here?
Well, we got something that's gonna make this look better, make it look more era correct. We're gonna move that DEF tank up to the front and cover it with the front half of this exclusive fuel tank that has this cutaway on the rear side to go over the DEF tank, and it's a 135 gallon size. Obviously we have 120 gallon tanks on here now, but we want this larger tank to get our strap spacing positioned a little bit better for us.
Cody and the guys in the CSM Fab Shop come up with this DEF Hideaway kit right before Louisville. So let's say late February, early March, and this is our chance to put one on and film it for you so you can see how easy or maybe how difficult it's going to be. But it'll really clean this up. The DEF tank will be covered inside here, and it's really going to make, like Michael said, era correct, give us that old school look. And while we're knocking that out, we're going to get rid of the 389, 379 style battery and toolbox, and you're going to see a CSM, another exclusive. We've got the diamond plate, old school 359 battery and toolbox that we're going to put on here. So here again, man, this truck is just changing little by little, but in such a powerful way. So I guess that being said, we can go ahead and get started.
Let's get to work. So let's begin to remove this tank. First thing I'm going to need to do is get a fuel transfer tank over here and a pump and pull all this fuel out into it. I don't need to try to handle this fuel tank with any fuel into it. It makes it really difficult to work with it. All right, about as much as our pump's going to suck out, so I'm going to go ahead and shut the pump off and do a little trick here. Right now the fuel's relatively level and shallow, so the hose isn't pulling up very well. So I'm going to take the straps loose, let this rear down, let the fuel transfer to the rear, so I'll have a smaller but deeper pool. I can pull more fuel out of it that way. Yeah, there's probably a pint of fuel left in the bottom of the tank, so this tank will be a lot easier to handle now. I'm going to go ahead and separate the fuel lines off the tank and the fuel sending unit connector. Cut a couple of wire ties here. I'm going to put these plugs in the lines when they come off, so it'll be less likely to have air get full in the system. There's going to be some no matter what, since I am opening the system up, but this will keep the fuels in the line from running out and having a much bigger pocket of air. Also keeps fuel from leaking all over the floor while you're working on it. Get some support back under this tank now and take out the second strap loose. So here's our tank pulled off. I'll also need to take all these fittings, our vent port, our suction and return line, and our fuel sender out of this tank and transfer them into our new one. You take special note of this, kind of which direction the connector is pointed. That is in relation to the swing arm with the float on it. Those can't be towards the side because it'll bind up against the side before it ever could swing, so it kind of has to be able to swing in the length part of the tank. Okay, so it's not going the same direction as the plug, but you can see that if it were in the center, this is longer than the tank is. Also, there's draw tubes in the tank right here, so it can't be swinging this way or it'll catch on the tubes here. So to make sure that it's free to move when it goes in the new tank. All right, so this DEF tank's got quite a bit of fluid in it too, so I'm gonna see if I can siphon that out and make this lighter. Just gonna do it the old school way with the pump and a hose in there. There we go. All right, I'm not sure we got it all out of there, but that's 15 gallons out of it. That'll be pretty close to where it was, so we lightened it up and made it a lot safer to handle this tank now. Okay, now I'm gonna start removing the DEF tank. So here's all my lines coming into the DEF tank. I've got an antifreeze line in and out to keep fluid from freezing. And here's my actual DEF fluid lines. And I've got one large electrical connector right here. And before I pull the coolant lines, I'm gonna go ahead and just clamp these shut so I don't lose antifreeze out of the truck while this is undone. Get this electrical connector undone. All right, we didn't lose very much of anything there. All right, now the tank is unplumbed from the truck. Let me go ahead and get a jack underneath here and take the tank off these brackets on the frame. And now off we come. Okay. There's our DEF tank off. Now before I can put this over here, I need to remove both tank brackets, but also the top of this tank was slightly higher than the fuel tank. So that fuel tank obviously can't cover over this at the height that it was on the frame. So this will have to be mounted lower on the frame than it was back here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the stainless cover off and fit this to the frame to see how high or how low I need to be with it. I need the tank, which will cover this end of the fuel tank, needs to be behind the front of the sleeper. Here I can see that This is about 8 inches forward of the sleeper already. I need the depth tank to be mounted about 9 inches further rearward than it is right now. Like the top of the tank or the bottom of that saddle is about 33.5 inches high, and this tank was about 34 3/4. So I'm about 1.25 inches higher than it was before. So this will have to get moved down about like that when it goes onto the frame, obviously further to the rear. All right, so this is not going to go directly on without some modifications, so we got to do some little work here. Over here on this right side, which is on the rear of the tank, this is the original mount onto the frame, this cast iron piece, and then this end bracket, which holds the tank, bolts onto it. Now, we said we had to move this tank down in order for this top to be below the top of the fuel tank. Well, that was going to cause a problem because our bolt holes were going to be up here in this edge of the cast. This hole would be below the frame. If I had to re-drill it higher to get in the frame, well, then the casting in here is just all sorts in the way. So what we've done here is cut off this top tab and knocked out this pin. It had a little peg in there that just kind of held the ends in place. And what I've got here is just a piece that we make. This is a Peterbilt toolbox battery box bracket. I've cut the excess off of it. It's only 10 inches long. I'm going to mount it to the side here, and this will use a bolt pattern. It's already the same as the truck cross members and everything. See, I've got a pair of holes over here that are going to be in about the right location. Yeah, I've got a bottom hole here. I'll have to drill a top one, and then I'll actually mount this bracket to it. Then I'll move that depth tank in here and get our height where we need to be and transfer the holes in this bracket into this end bracket of here. That way I don't have any unusual holes in the frame, and I can kind of fine tune adjust this to fit. And there's my 2 holes, and I'll probably drill a third one down below here. I got my rear mount mounted, 3 holes drilled in here, 2 of the 3 into here. I'll put this into place, get bolts in these 2, mark the hole that'll be at the bottom, and then lay out my holes for the front bracket. So I got my rear bracket mounted, the tank mounted. That's going to decide where this position sits. So I have a bolt that I took out of the frame down here, so I thought I might be able to use it for my front bracket. Now I'm fitting my front bracket up there to that, and I can see that my bracket's about 1/4 inch further back than that hole is. I don't want to move my bracket to that hole and then bolt this to it and kind of try to tweak the bracket over, because I'm going to probably pull one of these threaded inserts out of the tank. Definitely don't want to do that. So that hole will probably need to be slotted about 1/4 inch to the rear, but I'm going to go ahead and get this bracket into place and draw a line where the front edge of the bracket is so I can determine how far over from that line my hole needs to be. Now, since these brackets are just exactly like the toolbox and battery box brackets, these holes are in this line of bolts here, so I can come off of, basically draw a straight line across these bolts, intersect where my bolt hole will be here. Same thing with the bottom one. So here's our bracket that'll go on this side. These 2 holes I'm going to put in the frame. Here's that one existing hole that I'm going to have to slot out a little bit to the rear. What I need to do next is measure how far my holes are over from the edge of my line I just drew. Like I'm 1 5/8. And since I know I'm going to be the same spacing off the top of the frame for these holes, I'm going to get a measurement here. So I have 2.5 down for the top hole, and the bottom one looks like it's about 8 13/16, but it also should be in line with that. All right, so I need to drill that hole and elongate that hole this way a little bit. Now, in order to lay out the holes in this front bracket, I'm going to make sure that this tank is parallel to the frame, also be parallel with the fuel tank. So I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. One, I'm just going to take a level, find the level of the frame. That's touching the back line. Let me move this down so it's about the same, like about there. I'm also going to compare the height of the brackets on the tank to the brackets on the frame. Since I know the holes are pretty close to exactly the same distance apart there, I'm just going to come off of the top of that bracket to this, and it looks like I'm 9/16 below that top bracket. I think I'm 9/16 there also. I'll make sure I got it pushed back here all the way. At this point, I'm going to take my silver Sharpie. I'm just going to draw the 3 holes out from the bracket on the frame to the bracket on the tank. All right, so here's my 3 holes Then I'll need to drill on this tank bracket. I'm gonna get some gloss black paint, sheet a little bit of paint on all these edges I cut and these holes I drilled. Don't want any rust starting in there. Okay, now I've got this tank ready to put in position over here. I'm gonna roll it pretty close to where it needs to be. Go ahead and hook up my coolant lines and def lines before I push it all the way up to the frame while I have a little better access to the ports. I'm not gonna actually shorten up any of these lines. I'm just gonna bundle them up inside the frame. All right, guys, so off camera, we discovered we had a little bit of an interference issue. We'd had that def tank mounted to the frame up there at the front, about where the front of the fuel tank is here, and I started positioning our tank brackets and discovered that this bracket in this location, the tank was far enough forward that the strap was going to be going over the filler neck. So we had to pull the def tank off, and what we need to do doing this is get the tank in position before the def tank is mounted, get our bracket, especially this one right here because it's in between the filler neck and the manifolds, and obviously this isn't turned the right direction, just wanted to make a visual for you. Get these positioned, and that will leave you knowing where your def tank can be mounted. So like I said before, we were too far forward, so what we did is pull the def tank back off the frame. We moved all my brackets back 4 inches, reinstalled it, and now of course this tank bracket here will be coming off, but this will be our new rear one. It's going to be fine in between the manifold and the filler. This one here will get moved forward pretty much to the front of the actual fuel containment area of it. All right, so one other thing we're going to have to take into account is the profile of this def tank is not circular like the fuel tank. It actually kind of sticks out a little further up here at the top, and that sticks out further than a fuel tank does. What we're going to need to do is space the fuel tank brackets off the frame 1 to maybe 2 inches. Not anything to worry about because actually the factory spaced the passenger side fuel tank off the frame 2 inches to clear the DPF unit over there. So we're going to have us some spacers made, and we'll put that between the bracket and the frame when we get our brackets in their final locations. All right, so one thing to keep in mind is there's cross members and ends to these cross members throughout this frame. So in this case here where I'm going to be drilling these new holes, I need to look inside here and see what's going to be interfering possibly with these hole locations. I'm okay on these ones, and I'm okay up there because there's not a cross member there. Just check out your work before you drill holes in the frame, put the effort into it. All right, so I've got all the bolts out of the frame I'm going to need out of the way. I got the one tank bracket out of the frame, and now I need to lay out and drill holes for what'll be the tank bracket here and back here. That's a lot of holes to drill. I didn't want to try to measure every single one and take the chance of something getting off a little bit because it's a lot of pain to ream all those holes. So I just made myself a little template that I can set off the frame, and it laid out all 6 holes that I'm going to need for the tank bracket, as well as the 2 that I need to straddle here on the rear. This piece is the same size, same height off the frame, spacing and everything as the tank brackets are going to be. So I can just now take this, since I know that I'm going to be using these 2 holes here, look at that position, line up those 2, drill the other 3 holes I'm going to need, or 4 holes, 3 on that side and the 1 there in the middle. Then I'll come back here to the rear one, line those 2 up. There's a crossmember behind here, so I'll have to put these bolts back into these holes. That's what the cutout and the spacer will be for. I'll mark these 6 holes. Now I've got all the holes that I'm going to need to drill in the frame equally spaced off the bottom, bolt pattern, everything. Took about 5 minutes to make that pattern, and what, 30 seconds to do all this. It would have taken 10 minutes of measuring off the bottom of the frame rail and other existing points to try to get these all laid out. So this just speeds up the process quite a bit. So now I'm going to take my drill with a small drill bit. I'm just going to drill a small divot in the center of those holes for an alignment point for my frame drill. All right, guys, so I got Cody Birch here, a Fab Shop manager, and I've got with him yesterday about making spacers to move these tank brackets off the frame. These are 6 bolts that go through the frame, and you can see there's also a cutaway in here so it can straddle bolts if necessary. So Cody, tell me what you did to lay this out to make a spacer for us.
I've actually got this drawn in an AutoCAD, so we can head up to the office real quick and check it out. Okay guys, like we were just talking about, we had to make a spacer that'll fit this same footprint. You know, we don't want it sticking out where it's real obvious or anything, but you know, gonna have to line up with these, have the same slot in the middle to dodge other bolts in the frame, cross member bolts, things like that. So you can see we've got it drawn here. It's gonna get programmed and laser cut now. Again, they're gonna be cut out of 1-inch plate so we can stack those up. We're gonna make sure they're available for you. We don't have a part number set up for them yet, but we will very soon. And again, these will be available for when you're putting one of these tanks on as well.
All right, so now I've got all my fuel tank bracket holes drilled. I'm gonna go ahead and put bolts back into the holes. I removed these in order to get my mag drill in the frame right here. I've already got bolts filling the holes where the tank bracket used to be. I've got that tank bracket kind of hung on the frame temporarily. Let me go ahead and get these tightened up, and then I'll put our new spacers and the rear bracket on the frame here. All right, so here's gonna be my rear tank bracket, and here's the 2 inches of spacers that we had made. I'm gonna go ahead and try to get this whole assembly put up onto the frame and get some nuts in it. I'm gonna straddle those 2 bolts in the frame with that cutout in the middle of the spacer. Okay, so now I got these on here. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten up the rear one, at least on a couple of bolts. All right, so I've got my tank ready to get it fit up here. Like I said, I'm leaving that front bracket loose so I can get this tank to go over the def tank and under the bracket. You'll notice that there's no hole in this part of the tank for the filler neck. So what I'm gonna do before I put this into place is I'm gonna take my tape measure and get a few points of reference, probably off the frame, following the curvature to the filler neck, this battery box this direction, and maybe even from that solid tank bracket at the rear this direction. Now I should be able to push this tank over it. Now it won't go all the way because it's actually gonna hit the neck before I get there, but I can use that to find me a starting point to get a hole drilled. I want to check to make sure that my strap is going to fit everything just fine, and obviously my strap's going to overlap the filler neck sitting where it is, so I'm going to pull this back about 1 inch or so. And I might even throw the strap on here just so that I can sit into place so I know how much room both to the front and back that the strap is taking up. So for that, at that point right there, I've actually got about 1 inch there and about 1 inch over here, so that's all good, but I think I'm gonna roll it inward a little more, get those fittings up at the very top of the tank. All right, now I'm gonna come back here and check the front. Looks like I'm pretty good all the way around, so at this point I'm gonna go ahead and transfer my measurements I took off the frame to the filler neck and transfer those to the tank. Just starting again at the front, I'm gonna go from the frame out 26.5 inches. From that rear bracket, come this direction 35.5, and it's gonna be hard to measure off this box since it's so far off here now, but it looks like I'm really close to my 30 again. Now this tank's gonna have to go back a little bit, so I know that the hole is gonna actually be further downward than it is right there. I might just start off about 3/4 of an inch lower, and at that point I'll put a hole in there just barely big enough for the neck to pass through. All right, so we get this cut now. Let me go ahead and put this tank back up here and see how well our hole lines up. See if we need to make any adjustments either direction. And I've still got this front tank bracket loose here so I can get it positioned. I've got to do a little bit of lifting and lowering to get it under the bracket and over the def tank. All right, so here we are. Got my tank put back in place. Got the def filler coming right through the grommet. And as you can see back here at the rear of the tank filler neck is closer to the original location as it was before, much closer to the top of the tank, letting us get as much capacity in here as we should get anyway. Now that I know this fits, I'm going to take this back down and put the fittings back into here for our hose connections. All right, so let me go ahead, and since I got the tank all ready, I'm gonna go ahead and get it back into position for the final time. All right, that's my most important part right there, so I'm gonna use that to set up everything now for the final time. All right, that's all set up. I'll go ahead and put my straps on here now. All right, that's pulled up just tight enough to hold the tank in place. Like I said, we're putting a stainless steel wrap on here, and it'll go underneath these straps. So for the time being, I'm just getting them on here tight enough to keep the tank in position, to let our guys measure this out to make the custom wraps for them. And at this point, the installation of this tank is complete. I could bring my fuel lines up and hook them to our fittings and plug it in the sending unit. But as we mentioned, we're doing a stainless steel wrap on this tank. So in this case, I'm not gonna hook any of the lines up yet because the wrap is actually gonna go around all the fittings. So at this point, we've got our stainless steel wraps made over in our fab shop. I'm going to need to get those over here, lower the tank down a little ways as best we can, and get the wrap put over the tank. That'll cover every bit of the exposed aluminum part of this tank between the wrap and the bonnets on the end. It needs to be straight along this welded end and center my filler cut out and my manifold cut out as good as possible. I'm gonna go and use my masking tape, just tape this in place as many places as I can. Also, my wrap is stopping at that welded line right there also. Another point of reference to help keep me straight. First, when I squirt some soapy water all over this strap, it'll help kind of let the strap slide over this wrap a little bit. All right, so now I've got my rear section in place. Obviously it's not totally secured up there. I'm gonna go ahead and get my front section put into place and get it taped up here. This is gonna be a little bit easier to go. I've only got to line up with the hole for the filler neck and then make sure I'm just not overlapping the rear half of the tank wrap. All right, now I've got a really nice even gap between the front and the rear sections of this wrap. I'm gonna go ahead and get some lubricant on this strap. And I'll put this strap in place. Now that's all in place and it's kind of held up there loosely by the strap. My next step is tighten these straps up, keeping everything in place. So I'm gonna have to just very gently get my impact, start tightening this up. I may have to loosen it up, tighten it up, adjust, loosen it, adjust it some more until I get everything just right, centered around this depth filler right here. All right, so I had a heck of a time trying to keep the gap out between the tank and this tank wrap. So I needed a way to pull this wrap tight to the tank without it shifting its position. So put some tape down over the wrap to protect the stainless from my wrap here, wrap it all the way around the tank and let that kind of squeeze the wrap over the tank. So now I'm gonna go ahead and tighten my straps up. All right, so I'm gonna tighten up my rear strap. And as you can see right here, the end of the strap is trying to pull away from the tank because it wants to be straight. It's not formed to the same contour here. So I'm just gonna tighten this up, not very tight at all, only to, I think the factory specs are about 35 to 45 foot-pounds, but what I'm gonna do is just tighten it up until this strap is laying down to the tank. I'm gonna stop right there.
One thing though that I wanted to point out that we changed on this is this 1.5 inch or so wide strip that is welded on now. Brian wants to put the vinyl bras on the end with those 1 inch wide stainless bra straps, and of course with just the end cap it's not going to hold that. So guys, if you're going to order one of these tanks, give us a call and have us add this strip, and that way you can put that bra strap on there. It'll hold your vinyl bra real nice and neat. Of course, if you're not going to put the vinyl bras on the tanks, if you're going to paint the end caps, if you're going to polish the whole tank, if you're going to leave them just like this, whatever the case may be, then of course there's no need in adding this.
All right, so here's our black vinyl tank bras that we're gonna put on the back of the tank. As you can see, it's quilted, got a nice diamond pattern in it, and it's got about a 7-inch long area here that would typically, if you were just gonna do that by itself, or if you go all the way over here, you cut out a hole around the filler neck, and it's got a pull strap in there. But since we're gonna use some stainless bands to hold this on, we'll actually have the stainless band here really close to the end. We're gonna cut off all the excess, and it'll be a really nice, clean end. But put it on, I'm gonna leave it all together in its full size. I'm gonna slip it on the back of the tank. First off, I wanna notice that there's diamonds. Long ways should go up and down, so let me go ahead and put them on here that way. And I wanna keep this as tight as possible to the tank. So I'm just gonna keep pushing it forward and forward, get all the air pulled out, see if I can get all the wrinkles smoothed out of it. All right, here's my stainless band that I'm gonna wrap around the end of that bra. Obviously it's just a strip with a couple of ears bent in each end, and I'm gonna put that joint with a stainless bolt in it, kind of down here at about, the 4 or 5 o'clock position, looking at it from the rear so that you don't see it. All right, so I've got my bolt in the bottom, kind of pulled up just kind of snug. I still wanna be able to move this and position it. But what I wanna do is get this edge of the band right here at about where the weld is on the end cap of that fuel tank, and I want to keep the gap from this band to this sew seam as even as possible. So I'm just going to kind of run my fingernail across this edge, and there I can feel the weld on the end cap so that I know the stainless band is right there between the filler neck, the plate on it, and the end cap of the tank. So that's I'm going to try to keep this band in that position along this tank all the way around, but also pulling as much slack out as possible and keeping this gap here even. As you can see, it gets pretty big down here at the bottom, so I'll pull this part forward, and I could get a tape measure and get this really exact, but sometimes the sew seam and the stitching is a little bit crooked, so I'll just use my eyeball to get a good even gap all the way around here. I'll have to go around this probably 2 or 3 times, pulling it, tightening it up, pulling it, maybe adjusting this way, that way, tightening it a little bit more. Maybe back it off and move it. It just takes a little bit of effort to get it just right. But we want to have a good result when we're done, so we're going to put the extra time into making this as perfect as possible. This bra is on where it's going to be, band tightened down like it's going to be. Now, last step for this, I'm going to take a razor blade and cut through this vinyl on the front side, you know, towards the center of the tank of this stainless strap all the way around. And I have to remove that. Now I've got a nice, tight, trim bra on this end of the tank. It's really sharp, it's super secure, and being this small, that stainless band on it looks really clean. Got this rear complete. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the front of the tank. All right, guys, there we have it. Got our tank on, our wrap on, our bras on, got our lines hooked up, and our straps on the end. Now, you may be concerned about the spacing of the straps on this fuel tank. Now, we do have 2 straps over the portion of this tank that actually stores the fuel. You know, it stops right about there. But if this bothers you that there's this much distance, we do offer a fake strap that will just attach to the tank so that we can simulate equal spacing on 3 straps on this fuel tank. Honestly, this is probably one of the most difficult, complicated jobs we've done on this truck so far, but I gotta say this end result is well worth it. This is a beautiful fuel tank.